Cassio was pretty sure the universe had it out for him. Not in the grand, philosophical sense, but more like the way a cat toys with a particularly stupid mouse before it gets bored and bites its head off. He ducked as another piece of shrapnel whizzed past his head, slicing through the stale air of the cramped maintenance tunnel. Next time, remind me to try diplomacy, he grunted, wiping a smear of grease from his cheek and smudging it further. Diplomacy? Scoffed Ren, his lanky frame stuffed into a corner like last week's laundry. In this empire, you'd have better luck negotiating with a black hole. Cassio snorted, shifting the weight of the ancient laser rifle slung over his shoulder. It was a relic from the days before humans had realized that overconfidence could get you killed quicker than a spacewalk without a suit. Guess we're stuck with the rebellious hero routine then. Shame I left my cape at home. A cape would really bring out your eyes, Ren quipped, fiddling with a bundle of wires he'd procured from God's new wear. Anyway, focus. We've got a shiny new toy to check out. The shiny new toy in question was a weapon the alien overlords had been developing. Not your run-of-the-mill, let's blow them to tiny bits, kind of weapon. No, this one tinkered with empathy, made folks care just a little too much. And in the wrong hands, caring could be downright lethal. I'm all for emotional vulnerability, Cassio said, crawling forward, but this seems a bit much. That's the Empire for you, Ren replied, his tone as dry as the recycled air they were breathing. Always finding innovative ways to screw us over. The tunnel opened into a vast dome, its ceiling arching high above like the inside of some monstrous egg. The Dyson Sphere city stretched out around them, a sprawling maze of tech and tenacity held together by spit and spite. Think they'll notice if we borrow their new toy? Cassio asked, eyeing the distant glow of the alien facility. It was nestled behind a web of security drones that buzzed and hummed like a particularly judgmental swarm of bees. Borrow? Ren chuckled. I'm thinking more along the lines of permanent acquisition. Call it what you like, Cassio said. Just make sure we survive long enough to gloat about it later. They dropped to the walkway below, landing with a thud that echoed through the silence. Cassio's knees groaned in protest, another testament to just how far past his prime he was getting. If I don't make it, Cassio said, brushing dust from his pants, tell my mum I died doing something truly stupid. Ren grinned, showing teeth. She'd believe it. The pair crept along the perimeter, keeping to the shadows, ignoring the protests from their bodies that they were too old for this kind of nonsense. I'm beginning to think we should have brought more than 2 people for this, Ren muttered, pulling a face as they passed a particularly unpleasant form of alien graffiti. It was either an insult or an art piece. Hard to tell with alien aesthetics. What, and ruin the intimate atmosphere? Cassio shot back, then paused. They'd reached the first of the security checkpoints. All right, time to work your magic. Magic's not really my thing, Ren said, crouching beside the terminal. I prefer to call it unauthorized use of alien technology. His fingers danced over the alien console, bells and whistles that should have been beyond human comprehension. But humans are nothing if not annoyingly adaptable. Just don't fry us, Cassio said, peering out to ensure no patrols interrupted their illegal activities. I'll try, Ren replied, with all the enthusiasm of a man about to defuse an explosive with a toothpick. The console let out a series of chirps that sounded suspiciously like laughter. With a final beep, the security field flickered and died. Ren stood, dusting his hands. See? Easy. For you maybe, Cassio said, secretly glad he wasn't the one who had to play with the alien tech. Together, they slipped past the checkpoint, making their way toward the core of the facility. The hallways were eerily silent, the kind of silence that made you itch for noise just so you'd know you weren't alone. Ren paused, eyeing a branching corridor. New plan. We split up. Cassio arched an eyebrow. Oh sure, because that always ends well. Trust me, Ren said, I've got a good feeling about this. And I've got a bad feeling about your good feelings, Cassio replied, but relented. Fine. Just don't get yourself killed or, worse, caught. Ren saluted, his grin a flash of white in the dim corridor, then slipped away. Cassio shook his head, turning toward the main lab. He moved with the careful grace of someone who wasn't convinced he'd live to see tomorrow. The lab was a cavernous space, lined with rows of consoles and what looked like a lazy architect's attempt at modern art. The weapon sat in the center, a sleek, silver monstrosity that hummed with barely contained power. Well, aren't you a pretty thing? Cassio murmured, edging closer. The console reacted to his presence, displays flickering to life. Alien text scrolled across the screen. Cassio scowled at it, wishing he'd paid more attention during their crash course in deciphering alien mumbo-jumbo. Need a hand? Ren's voice crackled in his earpiece, startling him. You back already? I'm like a bad rash, Cassio. I just keep coming back. Charming, Cassio said, tapping at the console. All right, let's see what this does. Together, they worked through the controls, the weapon's interface a jigsaw of logic and lunacy. They bypassed security protocols with the ease of seasoned criminals, the weapon's power surging through the room. This thing could level a planet, Ren observed, his voice tinged with awe. Or turn its inhabitants into a sobbing mess, Cassio added. The question is, how do we make sure it doesn't do either? Their comms crackled, a new voice cutting in, sharp, authoritative. You're trespassing in sovereign territory. Identify yourselves. Cassio sighed. And here I thought we'd make it out without having to deal with the Empire's finest. Surrender is advised, the voice continued, with the kind of smugness usually reserved for cats or tax collectors. I've got a better idea, Ren whispered, his voice barely audible. We trigger the self-destruct. Of the weapon or us? Cassio quipped, his fingers flying over the console. Hopefully just the weapon, Ren replied. Though I'm not picky. The weapon's core began to pulse ominously, the air tingling with potential energy. Cassio's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline singing through his veins. Time to go, Cassio said, pulling away from the console. They turned as one, sprinting for the exit. Behind them, warning sirens blared, a cacophony of alien screeches and alarms. If we live through this, Ren panted, I promise to think twice before letting you make the plans. Promises. Promises, Cassio shot back, skidding into the corridor. They tore through the halls, the facility shuddering around them. The weapon, now a ticking time bomb, glowed with a fevered intensity. Almost there, Cassio gasped, lungs burning. They burst through the outer doors, the cool air a blessed relief. Behind them, the facility imploded, a silent flash of light that consumed itself, leaving nothing but a dark void where the weapon had been. Well, Cassio said, doubling over to catch his breath, that was an adventure. Next time, Ren said, between gasps, I'm picking the mission. Cassio nodded, straightening. Deal. Now, let's get back to base. I'm sure there's a bottle of something strong with our names on it. As they trudged away from the smoldering remains, Cassio couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Empire wouldn't take kindly to their toy being broken, and humans were nothing if not stubborn when cornered. But for now, they'd won a small victory. Tomorrow's problems could wait. Cassio, Ren said, his voice tinged with amusement. Yeah, you look like hell. Cassio laughed, a sound that echoed through the night. That's just how I feel. Cassio stood before the charred remains of the alien facility, feeling like he'd just kicked over an anthill with his bare foot. Well, that went well, he said, hands on his hips, surveying the smoldering ruin as if he'd meant for it to end this way all along. Ren smirked, leaning against a twisted metal beam that had once been part of something vaguely important looking. We're alive, aren't we? That counts as a win in my book. Cassio rubbed the back of his neck, still buzzing with the adrenaline of their narrow escape. Kind of makes you wonder what those bloody aliens were thinking, storing a weapon like that in here, doesn't it? They probably thought no one would be dumb enough to mess with it, Ren replied, his grin widening. Shows what they know about us. Stupidity or bravery, it's a fine line, Cassio shrugged. He squatted down, poking at a piece of debris with the toe of his boot. Guess we should figure out what that empathy weapon could do before we manage to blow it up. Ren pulled a small, battered datapad from his pocket, the screen cracked in a dozen places. Managed to snag this before the whole place went up in flames, he said, waving it like a winning lottery ticket. Don't say I never do anything for you. Cassio took it, squinting at the alien script that scrolled across the screen like hieroglyphs designed by a madman. Great, now, all we need is a Rosetta Stone and a degree in whatever the hell language this is. Good thing I paid attention in that crash course, Ren said, tapping his temple. Lucky for you, I'm fluent in reading between the lines. Cassio chuckled. I'm counting on it. Let's head back before we become the main event at an Imperial barbecue. The trek back through the Dyson Sphere City was as uneventful as it was long. The sprawling maze of tech and tiny living quarters was a testament to humanity's stubbornness to stick around where they weren't wanted. They passed by groups of people who looked at them as if they were more trouble than they were worth. Which, Cassio supposed, they were. You ever think about what you'd be doing if we weren't playing space cowboys? Ren asked as they walked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Probably something less likely to get me killed, Cassio replied. But then, where's the fun in that? Ren nodded sagely. True, can't say I'd want a desk job. I'd probably end up stapling my hand to the desk just to feel something. As they approached their makeshift base, an old hangar on the edge of the city that smelled perpetually of rust and regret, Cassio couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The Empire wouldn't just let them walk away after trashing their toy. So, Ren said, once they were inside and the door was firmly shut against the outside world. You want the good news or the bad news? Cassio dropped into a chair that creaked ominously under his weight. Let's get the bad news over with. Ren took a deep breath as if preparing to deliver a eulogy. Turns out the Empire's been working on deploying that empathy weapon on a much larger scale. They're planning to, well, essentially turn everyone into a bunch of emotional zombies, willing to do whatever they're told. Cassio grimaced. Sounds like something out of a bad science fiction novel. Yeah, Ren agreed, except this one's all too real. They'd have had everyone singing Kumbaya while marching off to do their dirty work. And the good news? Ren grinned, tapping the datapad. We've got their plans. We can warn the others. Maybe even stop them before they can put it into action. Cassio leaned back, the chair groaning again, and studied the ceiling with a frown. All right, so what's the plan? We go in guns blazing, or do we try something a little more subtle for once? Ren snorted. Subtle's not really our style, is it? But we've got to be smart about this. The Empire's got more resources than we could ever hope to match. Cassio sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'll admit, I've never been a fan of well-laid plans. They always seem to go sideways. That's why we're perfect for this job, Ren said with a wink. We're adaptable. We roll with the punches. Even when those punches are coming from 5 different directions at once. Cassio chuckled, shaking his head. Right, well, let's get to work then. I'd like to keep breathing for a few more years if it's all the same to you. They spent the next few hours hunched over the datapad, deciphering alien gibberish and piecing together what was left of the Empire's intentions. The more they uncovered, the more Cassio's skin crawled. Right, so, Cassio said after a while, pinching the bridge of his nose. We're dealing with a weapon that can override a person's willpower and make them pliant as a puppy dog. And they plan to deploy it on a planetary scale? Ren nodded grimly. That's about the size of it. They've got an orbital platform ready to go. All they need is the right signal and, poof. Instant compliance. Cassio exhaled slowly. Well, damn, that's a problem. Understatement of the century, Ren remarked dryly. We'll need help. Who do we know that's crazy enough to join this suicide mission? Ren tapped his chin thoughtfully. I can think of a few. But they're not going to like it. In fact, they might just shoot us on sight. Perfect, Cassio said, rubbing his hands together. It wouldn't be a proper rebellion if we weren't hated by all sides. Ren snorted. You've got a point. All right, let's reach out. Hopefully, they hate the Empire more than they hate us. The next few days were a blur of clandestine meetings, whispered conversations in dark corners, and dodging more Imperial patrols than Cassio cared to count. Slowly, but surely, they gathered a ragtag group of rebels, each with their own vendetta against the Empire. There was Mal, a former engineer who'd been on the wrong side of a power struggle and had a penchant for explosives. Then there was Eileen, a sharp-eyed sniper with nerves of steel and a tongue even sharper than her aim. And finally, there was Terran, a hacker whose talents were matched only by their paranoia. Looks like a lovely group of misfits, Cassio commented as they gathered in the hangar, a half-circle of distrustful faces watching him like he was a particularly unsavory insect. Speak for yourself, Eileen replied, crossing her arms. I'm just here to see the Empire burn. Join the club, Ren said. We've got jackets. Terran eyed Cassio suspiciously. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? Cassio hesitated, glancing at Ren. We infiltrate the orbital platform, sabotage the weapon before they can use it. Simple, right? Mal let out a bark of laughter. Simple, he says. You've got a death wish, mate. But I'll bite. What's life without a bit of danger? Cassio grinned, feeling more at ease. Glad to have you on board. We'll need every bit of help we can get. They spent the next few hours hashing out a plan that was part genius, part insanity. Cassio felt a strange sort of calm settle over him, a sense of purpose that he'd been missing for too long. This might actually work, Ren said, sounding almost surprised as they wrapped up their meeting. Cassio nodded. And if it doesn't, well, at least we'll go out with a bang. The day of the mission dawned, gray and overcast, the air heavy with anticipation. Cassio stood at the edge of the hangar, watching as the others prepared. You ready for this? Ren asked, sidling up beside him. Cassio took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. Let's go show the Empire what happens when they underestimate the underdogs. They boarded the battered old shuttle they'd managed to procure, a relic from a time when ships were built to last, even if they weren't pretty. Cassio slid into the pilot's seat, feeling the familiar thrum of the engines beneath his fingertips. All right, folks, he said over the comms, strap in and hold on to something. It's going to be a bumpy ride. The shuttle lifted off with a shudder that rattled Cassio's teeth, the city falling away beneath them. He focused on the controls, guiding them up and out into the vast expanse of space. Think we'll make it? Eileen's voice crackled over the intercom, a hint of challenge in her tone. Cassio smirked, the stars streaking past the viewport. We always do, don't we? The orbital platform loomed ahead, its sleek lines and ominous silhouette a stark contrast against the emptiness of space. As they approached, Cassio could see the faint glimmer of energy shields, their first obstacle. Ren, you're up, Cassio said, trusting his friend to do what he did best. Ren worked quickly, fingers flying over the console. Almost, there, he muttered, and with a flicker, the shields powered down. Nice work, Cassio said, steering them in closer. Now comes the fun part. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang, the airlock hissing as it engaged. Cassio felt his pulse quicken, a mix of fear and excitement that he hadn't felt in a long time. Let's move, he said, unbuckling his harness and leading the way into the belly of the beast. The inside of the platform was a maze of corridors and control rooms, each more sterile and unwelcoming than the last. Their footsteps echoed eerily, a reminder of just how alone they were in enemy territory. Which way? Mal asked, eyeing the fork in the path with a frown. Cassio consulted the map they'd pulled from the Empire's database. Right, then it's a straight shot to the control center. They moved swiftly, their presence a ripple of unease through the station's quiet halls. Cassio felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine, his senses on high alert. Here it is, Terran announced, stopping before a set of heavy doors that looked more suited for a bank vault than a control room. Ren stepped forward, already pulling out his tools. Give me a minute. The lock yielded with a satisfying click, and Cassio pushed the doors open, revealing the heart of the Empire's operation. Monitors lined the walls, each displaying a different part of their twisted plan. Let's shut this thing down, Cassio said, moving toward the main console. They worked quickly, each taking a station and inputting the codes they'd painstakingly gathered. The room buzzed with energy, the air thick with tension. We're running out of time, Eileen warned, her eyes flicking to the countdown displayed prominently on the largest screen. Cassio gritted his teeth, fingers flying over the controls. Almost there. With a final keystroke, the monitors blipped off, the eerie silence of the room a stark contrast to the chaos just moments before. We did it, Ren said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Cassio exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. Yeah, we did. The door behind them burst open, armed guards flooding the room. Cassio's heart skipped a beat, the victory slipping through his fingers like sand. Looks like we've got company, Mal said, reaching for his weapon. Cassio raised his hands, the familiar burn of adrenaline coursing through him. Guess it's time for Plan B. Ren snorted, drawing his own weapon with a flourish. Good thing we're adaptable. The guards advanced, weapons leveled, and Cassio shared a look with his team, an unspoken agreement that they'd come too far to back down now. With a battle cry that echoed through the station, they charged forward, a whirlwind of defiance against the Empire that sought to crush them. Cassio's fingers twitched on the grip of his ancient laser rifle. He glanced at Ren, who was cursing under his breath while firing back at the guards. You had to say we always make it, didn't you? Hey, optimism is a cursed language, Ren shot back, ducking as a shot whizzed past his ear, singing the air. I figured we were due for some luck. Next time, keep it to yourself, Terran chimed in, fingers dancing across their portable console like it was a full-time job, or a particularly tricky game of whack-a-mole. I'm working on a door lock override, but it's more stubborn than a union worker on strike. Cassio grunted as he skewered another guard with a well-aimed shot. And here I thought the Empire only hired brainwashed zealots. Good to know they have some standards. Mal was busy enjoying himself, hurling grenades with the glee of a kid at a fair. Honestly, this is the most fun I've had in ages. Beats another night at the bar listening to old war stories. Glad you're having a blast, Eileen said, her sniper rifle picking off enemies with mechanical precision. Some of us aren't suicidal maniacs, you know. Speak for yourself, Cassio muttered as he fired at the advancing guards. I'm starting to think we all are. The mood shifted when the first ripple hit. It wasn't a sound, just a sensation, like someone had twisted the air into a pretzel. Cassio stumbled, his hand going to his head as if to keep his thoughts from spilling out. The empathy weapon was clearly warming up, and it was already peeling layers off their mental defenses like an onion in a chef's hands. Anyone else feel that? Ren asked, shaking his head like a wet dog trying to dry off. Hearts racing faster than a gambler on payday. Yeah, Cassio replied, biting back a groan. Feels like a hangover, but worse. The kind that promises to stick around. The weapon was designed to make them compliant, but instead, it was making them question each other's motives. Cassio shot a wary look at Mal, whose fingers were dangerously close to another grenade. Mal, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. All good over there? Mal shrugged, but his grin was tight around the edges. Just thinking how easy it'd be to blow this place sky high. And anyone who disagrees. Cassio's stomach twisted. The weapon's influence was getting worse. It was like being stuck in a group therapy session where everyone was homicidal instead of just depressed. Focus, people, Eileen snapped, her sharp tones slicing through the tension. This thing's messing with our heads. We need to finish the job and get the hell out. Terran tapped something on their console, and the hallway's far door slid open with a reluctant groan. That'll do it. Let's move before our brains turn to mush. They sprinted down the corridor, Cassio keeping a wary eye on Mal, who looked like he was weighing the pros and cons of explosive solutions to their problems. Ren, what are the odds this weapon fries our brains before we can finish the mission? Cassio asked, trying to inject some humor into the situation. Ren made a face as he ran. Let's just say it's like playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded revolver. But hey, at least our odds are consistent. They burst into the next control room, a sprawling space filled with consoles and the faint hum of machinery. The weapon controls lay at the far end, taunting them with their proximity. All right, team, Cassio said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Let's shut this thing down. They spread out, each taking up a position around the control center. The empathy weapon continued its assault, the atmosphere charged with suspicion and doubt. Cassio worked on the main console, the alien script dancing before his eyes like some particularly cruel joke. He could feel the weapon prodding at his mind, whispering insidious doubts and fears, the kind that usually come free with a midlife crisis. Ren, how's it looking? Cassio called, trying to keep his focus on the task at hand rather than the nagging sensation that everyone wanted to kill him. Ren was hunched over his console, brow furrowed in concentration. Not great. It's like trying to disarm a bomb while someone reads you poetry. You know it's supposed to make sense, but all you want to do is make it stop. Poetry would be an improvement, Eileen muttered, eyes scanning the room for threats. I'm hearing voices, and they're all telling me to shoot you, Cassio. Good to know my charm still works, Cassio replied, fingers flying over the controls. Just don't act on it until we're done here. Terran cursed, slamming a fist on their console. These systems are more tangled than a politician's promises. I'm not sure I can disable it before we're all drooling wrecks. Cassio took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus past the buzz of doubt clouding his thoughts. We're not beaten yet. Everyone, remember why we're here. The Empire doesn't get to win because we can't keep our heads together. Mal let out a bark of laughter, though it was tinged with something darker. Easier said than done, mate. But I'm game. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the pressure of the empathy weapon a physical force now. Cassio gritted his teeth, his vision blurring as the controls shimmered, refusing to stay in focus. Ren, status? Cassio's voice was tight, strained. He could feel the weapon pulling at every insecurity he'd ever had, and a few he wasn't aware existed. Ren shook his head, looking more frustrated by the second. It's fighting us every step of the way. Like wrestling a bear. But I think I've got a back door into their system. Cassio nodded, though every fiber of his being screamed for him to stop trusting his own team. Do it, whatever it takes. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each one a battle against the oppressive wave of emotions threatening to drown them all. Cassio could feel the doubt creeping in, a shadowy presence at the edge of his mind. Got it, Ren exclaimed, the relief in his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Weapon controls unlocked. We can shut it down. Cassio's relief was short-lived as Mal suddenly raised his weapon, eyes wild. How do we know you're not compromised? Maybe you're leading us into a trap. Cassio didn't lower his rifle, keeping it trained on Mal. Because if I was, you'd already be dead. Now, stand down. The moment stretched, the empathy weapon amplifying the tension until it was a palpable thing, a wire drawn tight enough to break. Mal's eyes flickered, a brief flash of reason breaking through the haze. He lowered his weapon, though his expression remained wary. Fine, but we're not out of this yet. Cassio nodded, turning his attention back to the controls. All right, Ren, let's finish this. They worked in tandem, Ren's hands a blur as he navigated the alien systems with the precision of a surgeon. Cassio followed his lead, shutting down each of the weapon's subsystems with grim determination. As the last of the controls fell silent, the oppressive pressure lifted, like a storm breaking. Cassio sagged against the console, exhaustion and relief warring for dominance. We did it, Ren said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. It's over. Cassio nodded, offering a tired smile to his team. Yeah, we did. The door slid open, revealing a squad of Imperial guards, weapons drawn. Cassio sighed, raising his rifle once more. I guess we'll save the celebration for later. The team fell into formation, facing the new threat with weary determination. They might have been battered, bruised, and half mad, but they were still standing. Ready for round two? Eileen asked, her smile sharp and dangerous. Cassio nodded, feeling the familiar burn of adrenaline reignite within him. Always. As the guards closed in, Cassio shared a look with Ren, Terran, Mal, and Eileen. A silent promise that they'd see this through together, no matter the odds. And as the first shots rang out, Cassio couldn't help but think that despite everything, they might just make it after all. Cassio wiped the sweat from his brow, staring at the console like it had just insulted his mother. The alien script was still a confusing jumble, but he was beginning to see patterns, little glimpses of logic that might just save them from becoming a footnote in some Imperial archive. All right folks, I've got an idea, he announced, turning to face his ragtag bunch of companions. And as always, it's as risky as a naked bungee jump. Ren raised an eyebrow, trying to keep the mood light despite the looming squad of Imperial guards at the door. Let me guess, it involves us doing something stupid? Of course, Cassio replied with a grin that was more grimace. You see, this empathy weapon's got us by the short and curlies. But I think I might be able to rig our neural implants to counteract it. Terran looked up from their console, curiosity piqued. You mean those things we were told under no circumstances to tamper with? The ones that could fry our brains? Exactly those. But desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Cassio flashed another smile, this one entirely devoid of humor. And we're fresh out of better options. Eileen, taking a second to pick off a guard who was getting too comfortable with his trigger finger, shook her head. I knew signing up with you would be a one-way ticket to Crazy Town. But this is prime real estate in the heart of lunacy. Look, if anyone's got a better idea, I'm all ears. Otherwise, it's this or get turned into Empire bots, Cassio said, his tone carrying the weight of resignation more than confidence. Mal, who was usually the last to endorse any plan that didn't end with something blowing up, nodded slowly. Well, I've always wanted to see what's inside my head. Let's do it, but if I start quoting Empire propaganda, just shoot me. Promises, Promises, Ren muttered, moving closer to Cassio. All right, genius, how do we avoid turning into brain puddles? Cassio took a breath, trying to corral his racing thoughts. I've managed to cobble together a makeshift blocker using the tech on these consoles. It's like slapping a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it should dampen the effects of the empathy weapon. For a while. And if it doesn't? Terran asked, not bothering to hide their skepticism. Cassio shrugged. Then we'll make terrible conversation pieces at the next autopsy. Ren clapped him on the back, his smile a little too wide. Sounds like a plan. Let's get our brains zapped. They gathered around Cassio, who fumbled with a tangled mess of wires and circuitry that looked like it had been assembled by someone with a grudge against logic. Okay, Cassio said, holding up a device that might once have been a communication unit but now looked like an art project gone horribly wrong. This is gonna sting more than a wasp with a vendetta, but it's our best shot. He started connecting the device to their neural ports, each wince and twitch a testament to the discomfort of a DIY brain hack. The guards outside were getting bolder, their gunfire echoing like an ominous drumbeat. How's it feel? Cassio asked, focusing on manipulating the wires with more care than usual, given the stakes. Like a migraine's got a personal vendetta, Mal replied, grimacing as another wire found its place. But I've had hangovers that were worse. Ren closed his eyes, testing the new sensation. Feels like someone set up a white noise machine in my skull. Can't say it's pleasant, but it's better than the alternative. Eileen, ever the model of restraint, merely nodded. Let's see if it works before we get too cozy. With the makeshift blockers in place, Cassio turned his attention back to the alien console. The pressure in the room was lessened, a weight lifted just enough to breathe easier. But the guards were still a problem, each shot telling them they were running out of time. Cassio's fingers flew over the controls, each tap of the screen a defiant act against their enemies. All right, let's see if we've bought ourselves some breathing room. The empathy weapon's influence was noticeably reduced, the insidious whispers dulled to a murmur. Cassio couldn't help but feel a little triumph as he worked. Maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. Terran, who had taken a moment to test their mental clarity, nodded. Brains feel less like scrambled eggs. But we've still got that squad of cheerleaders outside to deal with. Just as the words left their mouth, the door heaved open wider, more guards pouring in like they'd been waiting for the curtain call of a bad play. Guess it's showtime, Cassio said, raising his rifle with renewed determination. Let's give them a performance they won't forget. The battle was frantic, a chaotic dance of gunfire and explosions. Mal's glee returned tenfold as he tossed grenades like confetti, each detonation a cathartic release of tension. Ren and Terran provided cover fire while Eileen picked off the more adventurous guards with surgical precision. Cassio stayed close to the console, his mind juggling the chaos around him and the delicate operation of their neural countermeasure. If he lost focus for even a second, it could all blow up in their faces, literally and figuratively. You know, Cassio shouted over the din, I always thought dying in battle would be more poetic. This just feels like a bad joke. And here I thought you'd want some last words, Eileen replied, her snark as sharp as her aim. Something to look noble on a gravestone. How about, I told you this was a bad idea, Ren quipped, ducking behind a console as another barrage of gunfire tore through the air. Cassio laughed despite himself, feeling an odd sense of camaraderie even amid the mayhem. Let's hope we're not planning our funerals just yet. Their efforts weren't without cost. The guards, while not the brightest stars in the Empire's galaxy, were persistent, their numbers seemingly endless. Cassio's makeshift blockers were holding, but they weren't foolproof. Each hit, each close call, tested them to their limits. Mal's laughter, a touch maniacal on a good day, was punctuated by the roar of another grenade. I could get used to this. Beats being a sitting duck any day. You've got a sick sense of fun, Terran shouted back, reloading their weapon with a speed born of necessity. But I'll admit, I'm starting to see the appeal. The battle surged and ebbed, like a tide of violence washing over them. Cassio caught sight of Ren, who was focused on keeping their position secure. Ren's optimism, usually an anchor in the storm, now felt like a defiant middle finger to the universe. You still think we're due for some luck, Ren? Cassio asked, his voice tinged with gallows humor. Ren grinned, the expression a little wild. Well, Either we make it, or we make history as the most entertaining failures this side of the galaxy. History or not, let's make sure we don't end up as a cautionary tale, Cassio said, determination hardening his resolve. As the fight dragged on, Cassio could feel the tide turning ever so slightly in their favor. The blockers, despite their hasty construction, were doing their job. Their team moved with more coordination, sharper reflexes cutting down the Empire's forces one by one. Keep pushing, Cassio urged, adrenaline and desperation mixing into a volatile cocktail. We can't let up now. The guards outside the door were thinning, their numbers dwindling as the team held their ground. Cassio adjusted the makeshift blocker, feeling the dull ache in his head recede further. It was working, and it was a damned miracle. But just as they began to see the light at the end of this very dark tunnel, an all-too-familiar hum filled the air. Cassio's heart sank as he recognized the sound of a larger weapon charging, a sound that promised nothing good. Looks like the Empires brought out the big guns, Eileen observed, her tone as dry as an arid planet. Any more bright ideas? Cassio turned back to the console, fingers moving with renewed urgency. Just one. Let's see if we can turn their own toys against them. Ren, who had managed to catch a glimpse of the weapon outside, gave a low whistle. That'd be great, because I don't fancy becoming a smear on the wall today. Terran laughed, though it was a little hysterical. What's life without a bit of danger, Just tell me where to shoot. Cassio worked feverishly, patching into the alien systems with the desperation of a man who refused to die without flipping the proverbial bird to his enemies. The weapon was powerful, yes, but so was human ingenuity, a fact he was banking on with every fiber of his being. All right, he said, his voice cutting through the noise with razor-sharp focus. If this works, we'll have the upper hand. The team braced, anticipation coiling tight as they prepared for the next onslaught. Mal checked his remaining grenades, Ren recalibrated his aim, Terran steadied their breathing, and Eileen kept her rifle ready, ever the sentinel. Cassio's fingers danced over the controls, each movement a calculated risk. Behind him, the sounds of the battle continued, a chaotic symphony of survival. Then, with a final keystroke, Cassio unleashed their countermeasure. The room hummed with energy, an electric charge that promised either salvation or catastrophe. The weapon outside stuttered, its power flickering like a candle in a gale. The guards faltered, their advance halted as confusion rippled through their ranks. Cassio grinned, the expression one of fierce triumph. Looks like the tables have turned. The team seized the opportunity, pressing their advantage with renewed ferocity. The guards, robbed of their momentum, were easy pickings for a group that had survived the worst the galaxy could throw at them. As the last of the guards fell, the hum of the alien weapon died down, leaving only the ragged breathing of the survivors in its wake. Cassio leaned against the console, exhaustion pulling at his limbs like gravity on steroids. Anyone else feel like celebrating? Ren laughed, a sound of pure relief. I think I owe you a drink. Or a few. Terran smiled, their eyes bright with the thrill of victory. Next round's on me. Mal, characteristically exuberant, let out a whoop that echoed through the room. Now that's what I call a party. Eileen, true to form, only nodded, her satisfaction evident in her calm demeanor. Let's get the hell out of here before they send in the cavalry. Cassio looked around at his team, a weary grin on his face. They'd done it. Against all odds, they had survived. And somehow, that made all the madness worth it. With the threat temporarily neutralized, they moved quickly and quietly, ready to face whatever the galaxy threw at them next. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that the universe had a sick sense of humor, and they were its favorite punchline. The air within the maintenance tunnel was hot and suffocating, like someone had forgotten to pay the ventilation bill. A sense of triumph lingered, but it was a thin veneer over the reality of their predicament. Cassio's victory dance had been cut short the moment he realized the Empire had more tricks up its sleeve, tricks that made their last skirmish look like a warm-up act. Cassio leaned against the wall, his ancient laser rifle held loosely at his side. Anyone else feel like the galaxy's trying to give us a collective wedgie? Ren, ever the optimist, or fool, depending on the day, snorted. If by wedgie you mean annihilation by a bunch of brainwashed zealots, then yeah, I'm feeling it. Just another day in paradise, Terran quipped, fiddling with the portable console as if it could somehow magic them out of this mess. What now? Mal huffed, his usual bravado dampened by the smell of burnt electronics and desperation. He palmed another grenade, the familiar weight a small comfort amidst the chaos. Cassio's resolve flickered, the weight of leadership settling like a boulder on his spine. We keep moving. We find another way to turn the tables or die trying, preferably the former. Die trying sounds like it might be the special of the day, Eileen muttered, her gaze fixed on the entrance like a hawk watching for prey. Half price with a side of regret. The team began their retreat, each step heavy with the knowledge that their triumph was short-lived. The maintenance tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, a metallic vein running through the belly of the Dyson Sphere city, feeding into the alien facility where their latest nightmare awaited. As they moved, the familiar hum of the alien weapon buzzed in the background, an ominous reminder that their temporary victory had done little more than poke the Empire's anthill. And now, the ants were swarming. Cassio, Terran said, urgency threading through their voice. You've got that look. What look? Cassio asked, not breaking stride. The one that says you're about to do something either incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. Or both, Ren added, his voice stained with dark humor. Cassio sighed. The plan was to disable their weapon, not play musical chairs with death. Hey, it's a bold strategy, Mal chimed in, if you're aiming for a Darwin Award. The tunnel spat them out into another section of the alien facility, a place that had seen better days, assuming those days didn't involve being blown to bits. Cassio paused, surveying their surroundings with the eyes of a man who'd seen too much and lived to tell about it. Guys, this place is a death trap, he said, stating the obvious like it was a new discovery. Thanks, Sherlock, Eileen shot back, her patience as thin as the air. Got any other revelations for us? Cassio chuckled, a dry sound that hinted at exhaustion. Only that we've got to find a way to shut down that empathy weapon before it turns us into mindless drones. Mindless drones? Ren grinned. I thought that was just my default setting. Could have fooled me, Terran said, their fingers dancing over the portable console. Got anything up your sleeve, Cassio? Just my arm. Mal groaned. We're doomed. As if conjured by Mal's pessimism, the ground beneath them shuddered, the hum of the alien weapon crescendoing into a full-blown cacophony. The world tipped sideways, and for a heart-stopping moment, Cassio was certain they'd reached the end of the line. But fate, or perhaps the universe's wicked sense of humor, had other plans. The weapon didn't fire, not completely. Instead, it sputtered and died, like a cosmic joke that had lost its punchline. What the hell was that? Ren asked, blinking as if he'd woken from a bad dream. Cassio frowned, his mind racing. Some kind of malfunction? Lucky break? Terran suggested. Or a trap, Eileen said, ever the skeptic. Cassio weighed their options, which were about as numerous as a singularity's sense of mercy. We need to regroup, find a way to exploit whatever just happened. Assuming it doesn't blow up in our faces, Ren added with a grin that was half defiance, half madness. Right, Cassio said, nodding. Let's get moving before, he never got to finish the sentence. The weapon roared to life again, its energy cascading through the facility like a tidal wave. Cassio felt it, a pressure in his skull that threatened to turn his brain to mush. Move, he shouted, spurring the others into action. They ran, each step a desperate bid for survival. The facility around them crumbled, walls buckling under the strain of the weapon's power. It was as if the universe had finally tired of their antics and decided to drop the ceiling on their heads as a not-so-subtle hint. Been nice knowing you, folks. Mal yelled, his voice almost lost in the chaos. Save it for the afterlife. Cassio replied, teeth gritted against the pain. They burst into another corridor, this one mercifully intact. Cassio stumbled, catching himself on the wall. We've got to find a way out of this mess. Working on it, Terran shouted back, fingers flying over the console. Cassio spared a glance at Ren, who was running alongside him, a look of determination painted across his features. You still think we've got a chance? Ren's smile was a flash of teeth, a promise of rebellion. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as we can. Their retreat was a mad dash, a frantic race against time and the Empire's relentless pursuit. Cassio's mind spun with possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. Just when it seemed the universe couldn't squeeze them any tighter, they stumbled into an open area, a storage bay of sorts, filled with crates and half-broken machinery. A temporary refuge, perhaps, but it would have to do. Everyone okay? Cassio asked, scanning the group for injuries. Define, okay. Eileen snapped, her rifle still at the ready. Alive, breathing, not actively on fire, Cassio replied. Yeah, then I'm okay, she conceded, lowering her weapon slightly. Terran slumped against a crate, exhaustion etched into every line of their face. Got any brilliant ideas, or should we just skip to the part where we start trading our organs for safe passage out of here? Cassio shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. I'm fresh out of brilliant ideas. Typical, Mal said, though there was no real heat in his words. Maybe we can barricade the door, Ren suggested. Buy us some time. Time for what? Eileen asked, her gaze flicking to the door as if daring it to open. Time to think, Cassio said, though he knew it was a hollow promise. They were running on fumes, and even if they managed to hold off the guards, the weapon was a problem they couldn't outrun. Terran sighed, the sound a weary whisper. We need to disable that weapon, permanently. Cassio nodded, a grim set to his features. Easier said than done. Maybe we can. The door exploded inward, shards of metal slicing through the air like deadly confetti. Cassio hit the ground, the world a blur of noise and movement. Looks like the Empire's RSVP'd to the party, Ren said, scrambling for cover. They really know how to make an entrance, Mal quipped, lobbing a grenade towards the door. The ensuing explosion was a symphony of chaos, but even that wasn't enough to deter the guards. They poured into the room, weapons blazing, each one a testament to the Empire's unyielding resolve. Cassio fired back, his rifle kicking against his shoulder with reassuring familiarity. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. Hold the line, he shouted, though the words felt like a lie. We're not gonna make it, Terran said, their voice flat with resignation. Cassio wanted to argue, to promise that they'd find a way out, but the words died in his throat. He'd led them this far, against impossible odds, but the universe was a cruel mistress, and it seemed she'd finally decided to collect. Ren was beside him, his optimism a fragile thing, but they're all the same. Cassio, whatever happens, it's been one hell of a ride. Not over yet, Cassio replied, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. The guards pressed their advantage, the weapons hum a constant background noise that threatened to consume them all. Cassio could feel its influence, the subtle pull that whispered of surrender, of giving in to the inevitable. But he was stubborn, and if the universe wanted him to lie down and die, it was going to have to work a hell of a lot harder. On your left, Eileen shouted, her rifle spitting fire at an encroaching guard. Cassio turned, his rifle barking in response. The guard went down, but there were always more. He risked a glance at Terran, who was still fiddling with the console like it held the secrets to the universe. Got anything? He asked, hope a fragile thing in his chest. Terran shook their head, frustration written large across their features. Nothing that'll do us any good right now. Then we hold, Cassio said, though he wasn't sure how much longer they could last. The battle ebbed and flowed, a brutal dance of survival. Cassio's team fought with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. Each moment was a knife edge, a balance between holding on and losing it all. Cassio felt the weight of his decisions, the responsibility for each life hanging on his every action. It was a burden he carried willingly, but it was heavy, and the cracks were starting to show. We're getting pushed back, Mal shouted, his usual exuberance dimmed by the reality of their situation. I know, Cassio replied, desperation clawing at his insides. The room was a battlefield, and they were losing. Cassio's mind raced, searching for a way out, a way forward, but the options were dwindling. We've got to fall back, he shouted, the words tasting of defeat. Where to? Ren asked, his voice tight with adrenaline and fear. Anywhere but here, Cassio replied, grimly aware that there might be no anywhere left to go. The team began their retreat, each step a surrender to the inevitable. Cassio covered their escape, his rifle barking defiantly against the tide of Empire soldiers. But even as they fled, he knew it was a temporary reprieve. They might have escaped this time, but the weapon still loomed, a constant threat that promised only ruin. And as they disappeared into the shadows, Cassio couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The weapon was a problem they couldn't ignore, and it was only a matter of time before it caught up with them. The universe, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. And if it had its way, Cassio knew they might not survive to see another day. The storage bay was a mess. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burnt circuits and desperation, a scent Cassio had become intimately familiar with. He sat against a crate, his ancient laser rifle resting across his knees like an old, unreliable friend. Around him, the team licked their wounds, both physical and metaphorical. "Anyone else think we should have stayed in bed this morning?" Ren quipped, nursing a bruise that was blossoming across his cheek like some perverse flower. "Bed?" Terran snorted, still fiddling with the portable console. "I got out of my bunk only because it was on fire." "I think I'd prefer a burning bunk," Mal added. He was doing something that looked a lot like petting his grenade, which was either comforting or terrifying. Probably both. Cassio chuckled despite himself. It was either that or scream, and he'd never been much for public displays of emotion. "All right, team, let's take stock. We're hiding from the Empire. There's an empathy weapon that wants us all to join a forced meditation class, and we have about as much chance as a snowball in a plasma storm." "Bright side, it can't get much worse," Ren said, earning a glare from Eileen. "Don't jinx it," she warned, the kind of warning that usually came with a barrel aimed at your head. Cassio sighed, rubbing at the stubble on his jaw. "We need a new plan." "No kidding," Terran muttered, eyes glued to the console like it might sprout wings and fly them to safety. Cassio let his gaze wander around the cramped space. The storage bay had been built for storing things. Surprise, surprise, not for impromptu war councils. But Cassio had made do with worse. Hell, he'd once planned an entire op in a sewage system while knee-deep in what even the universe would agree was bad luck. His eyes drifted over the team. They were a ragtag bunch, each one as flawed and broken as the rest, but they were his ragtag bunch, and he wasn't about to let the Empire turn them into mindless drones. There had to be a way out of this mess, or at least a way to cause some mayhem on the way down. "What if we out-crazy them?" Cassio said suddenly, the words slipping out before he'd fully thought them through. Ren tilted his head, intrigued. "Out-crazy the Empire? Sounds like my kind of party." "Seriously?" Eileen deadpanned. "You want to gamble our lives on being unpredictable?" Cassio shrugged, a lopsided smile crawling across his face. "Worked for us this far." Mal snorted. "Only because the universe has a twisted sense of humor." "But it's true," Cassio insisted, the kernel of an idea taking root. "The Empire's weapon, hell, their whole strategy, relies on predictability. They think they've got us figured out because they've got us outgunned. And you're suggesting we do the opposite of what they expect?" Terran cut in, skepticism laced in their tone. "Exactly. We throw them off balance. Hit them in ways they can't anticipate. Use the one thing they can't calculate, human chaos." Ren grinned like a madman. "I'm in. Let's give them a taste of good old human unpredictability." Eileen crossed her arms, but Cassio caught the slight twitch of her lips, a shadow of a smile. "This is either the best idea you've ever had or the fastest way to get us all killed." "Maybe both," Mal said, raising his grenade in a mock toast. "But it's better than waiting to be hunted down like space rats." Cassio nodded, the plan, the insanity, forming in his mind. "We go after the weapon. It's our only chance. Even if we reach it, what then?" Terran asked, slumping against the console with a resigned sigh. "We don't have the tech, or the firepower, to take it down." Cassio met their eyes, determination etched into his features. "We use their own weapon against them. It's empathy-based, right? Then we overload it." Ren let out a low whistle. "You're talking about frying the thing. Turn their own tech into a liability. Isn't that what I just said?" Cassio replied dryly. "Okay, so how do we overload it?" Eileen pushed, her skepticism evident. "We can't exactly plug it into a wall socket and hope for the best." "That's where the human chaos comes in," Cassio said, the plan solidifying. "We create enough interference, enough unpredictable behavior, that it can't process. We crank the dial up to 11 and watch it blow." "It's risky," Terran said, though there was a glint of interest in their eyes now. "Everything out here is risky," Cassio shot back. "But every time they think they've got us, we've turned the tables. We can do it again." Mal grinned, the kind of grin that usually came with explosions and a disregard for personal safety. "What do you say we give the Empire a hell of a show?" They spent the next few minutes hashing out the details, each contributing to the plan with their own brand of insanity. It was reckless and half-baked, but it was more than they'd had a moment ago, and it gave them something to cling to. They were going after the weapon. Not to destroy it, but to make it implode under the weight of its own complexity. To turn the Empire's greatest tool into their biggest liability. If the universe wanted to play games, then they were going to change the rules. "All right, team, this is it," Cassio said, standing and shouldering his rifle. "We move fast, use the element of surprise, and improvise." "Any questions?" Ren raised a hand. "Does this mean we get to break stuff?" Cassio smirked. "Of course. You think I'd leave that out?" "Then I'm in," Ren said, brandishing his weapon with a flair that was half bravado, half genuine enthusiasm. "Let's go break the universe," Mal added, because of course he would. They rallied, a motley crew of desperation and determination. Cassio led the way, the plan a fragile thing, but one they all believed in. Because what else did they have left to lose? They slipped through the corridors, moving like shadows between the flickering lights and the ominous hum of the weapon that lurked somewhere above. Cassio kept to the front, his mind a whir of calculations and potential pitfalls. The Empire had them outnumbered, sure. But numbers weren't everything. The Empire's strength was in its predictability, its relentless adherence to protocol. It was a well-oiled machine, and they were the wrench about to jam the gears. "Keep it tight," Cassio murmured over his shoulder as they moved, the whisper of boots on metal the only sound. The team moved in a loose formation, each one watching a different angle, ready for the inevitable confrontation. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch, and Cassio wouldn't trade them for any squad in the Empire. They reached the access point to the weapons chamber without incident, too easy, which only set Cassio's nerves on edge. The door was sealed, a heavy reinforced barrier that promised nothing good. "Think you can crack it?" Cassio asked Terran, nodding to the console beside the door. "Already on it," Terran replied, fingers dancing over the keys. "Give me a minute." "You got 30 seconds, Eileen said, her attention fixed on the corridor behind them. Cassio watched the team, the tension a living thing between them. But it was more than nerves, it was anticipation, a sense of purpose that had eluded them for too long. The door hissed open, revealing the chamber beyond. Cassio took point, weapon ready, and stepped inside. The weapon loomed above them, a grotesque amalgamation of alien tech and imperial ingenuity, pulsing with a sinister glow. "Remind me why we're doing this again?" Ren whispered, eyes wide as he took in the monstrosity. "Because if we don't, we'll end up part of the Empire's new and improved mindless masses," Cassio replied, moving forward with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Good enough for me," Ren said, following close behind. "All right, you know the plan," Cassio said, addressing the team. "We need to overload it. Give it too much to handle." "Terran, you're up," Mal said, nodding towards the console that controlled the weapon. Terran approached, a look of concentration settling over their features. "I'll see what I can do, but no promises. This thing isn't exactly user-friendly. Just give it everything you've got," Cassio said. "We'll cover you." They took positions around the chamber, ready to defend against any response the Empire might throw their way. Cassio felt the tension coil tighter, a snake ready to strike. The weapon hummed, a low, malevolent sound that made Cassio's skin crawl. "Anytime now, Terran," he muttered, glancing at the door. "I'm working on it," Terran snapped, fingers flying across the console. "This thing's got more security than an infernal vault. Not to rush you or anything, but I think we've got company," Eileen said, her voice clipped. Cassio turned to see the first of the soldiers entering, their presence a stark reminder of the stakes. "Hold them back," he ordered, already firing his weapon. The chamber erupted into chaos, the team fighting to hold the line while Terran worked their magic. Cassio's heart hammered in his chest, a drumbeat of fear and defiance. "Almost there," Terran called, voice tight with concentration and urgency. Cassio focused on the battle, each shot carefully measured. But it was a losing game, and they all knew it. The Empire had numbers, and they had time. Neither was on Cassio's side. The weapon pulsed, a sinister promise of what was to come. Cassio felt the pressure in his skull again, the whisper of surrender, and he gritted his teeth against it. "Anytime now," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I got it," Terran yelled, the console flashing in confirmation. The weapon screamed, a high-pitched wail that echoed through the chamber. Cassio felt it, like a pressure valve releasing. It was working, the plan was working. Fall back, Cassio ordered, the words barely audible over the cacophony. They retreated, a mad dash away from the impending chaos. The soldiers hesitated, confusion in their ranks as the weapon began to overload. Cassio spared one last glance at the chamber, the weapon a bright, blinding light that promised destruction. It was a beautiful thing, in its own way, a testament to human unpredictability and sheer stubbornness. As they disappeared into the shadows, Cassio couldn't help but smile. They were still alive, still fighting, and they'd just turned the Empire's greatest tool against them. The universe might still be against them, but for once, it was their move. "All right, folks," Cassio announced, glancing at his ragtag crew with the kind of confidence that could only come from having absolutely nothing left to lose. "Time for the final act. Remember, the Empire thinks they've got us pegged as predictable meat sacks. Let's remind them why you don't underestimate a desperate human with a grudge." "Or a grenade," Mal added, cradling his explosive like it was his favorite pet. "Right," Cassio agreed, "or a grenade. We're doing this old school. Human chaos. Ren, you got that covered?" Ren grinned, twirling a knife with enough flair to make a circus act jealous. "I'm a walking catastrophe. You don't need to worry about that." Cassio nodded. "Good. Eileen, you keep an eye out. Anything comes up behind us, you've got full permission to blast it." Eileen smirked, her weapon ready. "I'll try not to hit anyone important." "And Terran," Cassio turned to the tech wizard who was busy fiddling with a portable console. "We're counting on you to make sure this thing doesn't just overload, but that it does so with enough flair to make the Empire rethink their career choices." "Piece of cake," Terran replied, not even looking up from the console. "As long as by cake you mean extremely difficult and potentially lethal." Cassio took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what they were about to do. "All right then, let's give the Empire a hell of a show." They moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had spent far too much time together under far too much stress. Cassio led the way, ancient laser rifle in hand, ready to dish out some good old-fashioned unpredictability. The corridors of the Dyson Sphere city loomed around them, a labyrinth of metal and menace. The plan was simple: create enough chaos to overwhelm the weapon's ability to adapt. Diplomacy, they had found, was not a strong suit of the Empire's brainwashed zealots. But chaos? That was something humans excelled at. "Ren, you're up," Cassio said as they approached the first choke point, a narrow passageway leading into the heart of the facility. Ren didn't wait for further instruction. He leapt forward with a whoop, tossing a couple of flashbangs ahead of him. The corridor lit up with blinding light and deafening noise, a symphony of disorientation that set the stage for their attack. Cassio charged in after him, firing his laser rifle with a precision born of desperation rather than skill. The Empire's soldiers might have had better training, better equipment, and far more patience, but they didn't have Ren, who was currently doing his best impression of a human tornado, nor did they have Cassio, who was fueled by the kind of reckless determination that often precedes historic blunders. "Keep them off balance," Cassio shouted over the din, taking cover behind a protruding conduit. Mal, with his typical flair for the dramatic, lobbed a grenade down the corridor. It exploded with a satisfying thud, sending debris and Imperial soldiers flying. "That's one way to start a party," he said, clearly enjoying himself far too much. Eileen and Terran kept the rear secure, laying down suppressive fire to discourage any Imperial reinforcements from joining the fun. Terran's console beeped with data as they tried to synchronize its systems with the weapon's controls, a task made no easier by the ongoing chaos. "Any luck with that thing?" Cassio called to Terran, ducking a volley of Imperial fire. "Define luck," Terran replied, unfazed. "If it means finding a way to confuse the hell out of it, then yeah, we're golden." Cassio took that as a good sign and focused on not getting shot. The Imperials were regrouping, trying to form a coherent defense against the madness they faced. But that was the beauty of their plan, there was no coherence to be found. They were a human hurricane, and predictability was not in their vocabulary. "Time to up the ante," Cassio muttered, nodding to Mal. Mal grinned, the kind of grin that usually accompanied catastrophic property damage. He pulled out a small device from his vest, a jury-rigged EMP generator just potent enough to fry communication systems but hopefully not potent enough to fry them. He activated it with a flourish and tossed it into the fray. The device went off with a pop, and the Imperial soldiers suddenly found themselves in a world gone silent. Cassio could almost hear the collective confusion as their comms went dark, leaving them isolated and unsure. "Now, Terran," Cassio barked, taking advantage of the momentary lull. Terran's fingers danced over the console, inputting a series of commands that made Cassio's head spin just watching. "And, done," they announced triumphantly, standing back as the console interface sparked one last time before going dark. The weapon, that monstrous amalgamation of alien and Imperial technology, shuddered. For a moment, it seemed to hold its breath, a predator unsure of its prey. Then it began to glow, not with the usual menacing pulse, but with a frantic staccato, lights flickering in erratic patterns. Cassio felt it in his bones, the subtle shift in the air as the weapon struggled to process the overload. "Fall back," he ordered, knowing they had only seconds before the whole place became a fireworks display of impressive magnitude. They retreated, moving quickly through the corridors they had memorized in the quiet hours of their planning. Behind them, the weapon let out a series of high-pitched whines, a machine in distress, before the sound escalated into a crescendo of failure. Cassio didn't look back, he didn't have to. The ground beneath them trembled, and a shockwave rolled through the city, shaking loose bits of metal and sending clouds of dust into the air. "Did we just pull that off?" Ren asked between breaths, a mix of disbelief and exhilaration in his voice. "Looks like it," Cassio replied, leading them into the relative safety of a storage bay. "We gave them chaos, and their precious weapon couldn't handle it." "Serves them right," Eileen said, checking her weapon and giving Cassio a nod of respect. "They thought they could control everything. Turns out, they can't control us." Terran, still holding onto the portable console like it was a lifeline, looked up with a grin. "I think we just got promoted to most wanted. But hey, at least we've got a hell of a story to tell." "Just another day in paradise," Mal quipped, though there was a note of pride in his voice. "We should do this more often." Cassio shook his head, a weary smile tugging at his lips. "Let's not. Once is enough for a lifetime." They paused, catching their breath, each of them riding the high of survival against impossible odds. The Empire would regroup, would adapt, would come for them with everything they had. But for now, just for the moment, they had won. Cassio glanced at his team, feeling a swell of something he didn't quite recognize. Not hope, exactly, but maybe something close. They were still here, still fighting, and the universe hadn't managed to crush them yet. "Let's move before they find us again," he said, leading them out of the storage bay and into the shadows where they would disappear, like ghosts in the machine. And as they slipped away into the dark, Cassio couldn't help but chuckle, the sound bordering on delirium. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd taken on the Empire and come out the other side. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. The Empire wasn't the only game in town. Not anymore. The Dyson Sphere city was finally silent, the chaotic echoes of battle replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Pipes groaned, and a few distant sparks fizzled out in protest, but the bulk of the action was behind them. Cassio and his crew trudged through the aftermath, the air thick with the scent of burnt circuits and singed egos. "Smells like victory," Ren quipped, kicking a piece of debris out of his path. "Or a really bad barbecue. Victory must have a hell of a marketing team," Cassio replied, glancing at the alien facility which had once housed an Empire-sized middle finger. "Because this looks more like a disaster zone." "Yeah, but a disaster zone we survived," Mal said, cradling his bag of leftover explosives like they were his newborns. "That's gotta count for something in the great cosmic ledger." They made their way through the smoking corridors. Ren kept a knife in hand, twirling it absent-mindedly, ever the poster child for controlled chaos. It was a reminder. While they might have won today, the universe never ran out of ways to kill you. "Well, I say we've officially put the fun in dysfunction," Terran declared, fiddling with the portable console now staring blankly back at them. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't getting a little tired of being a disaster tourist." Cassio chuckled, a sound more sardonic than joyful. "You know what they say. It's not the destination, it's the catastrophic journey." They entered the storage bay, the unofficial headquarters of their rebellion against the Empire's iron-fisted regime. Here, The air was marginally less oppressive, though still holding the metallic tang of victory, if victory had the bad sense to die in a pub fight. Anyone else think we've got a long way to go on this whole, overthrowing the Empire, thing? Eileen asked, sitting down heavily on a crate that creaked ominously under her weight. I mean, yeah, we trashed their big toy, but they've got more where that came from. Cassio shrugged, leaning against a wall that had seen better days. We're not in it for the easy wins, remember? We're here to remind them that humans are a lot like cockroaches. Hard to kill, ugly as hell, and impossible to get rid of. Terran snorted, their tone dry as the desert plains of their home planet. You really know how to inspire a team, Cassio. Ever thought about writing motivational pamphlets? Yeah, how to die heroically without really trying, Mal chimed in, detonating the tension with humor as effectively as he did with explosives. Step 1. Make terrible life choices. Step 2. Profit? Ren sat down beside Eileen, throwing an arm over her shoulders. Look, we might be outnumbered, outgunned, and out of our minds, but we're not out of options. And frankly, I'd rather go down swinging than live quietly under the Empire's boot. Hell, a quiet life sounds terrifying, Terran added, shifting the weight of the now useless console. Imagine having nothing to do but stare at the stars and contemplate existence. Pass. Cassio shook his head, a smile playing on his lips despite the gravity of their situation. We've got plenty to do. Starting with not getting caught. The team settled into a momentary lull, a rare pause in the relentless march of defiance. They were weary, worn out, but not beaten. Not yet. All right, so what's the plan? Eileen asked, always the practical one, even amidst the chaos. We keep running? Take the fight to them? Cassio sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We keep moving. The Empire's going to be pissed, and I'd rather not stick around to see what kind of creative torture they've got lined up. Yeah, the Empire's creativity is the only thing more dangerous than their weapons, Ren agreed, adjusting his knife sheath. Let's not give them a chance to show off. And speaking of moving, we should probably find a place to patch up, Terran suggested, eyeing a few singed wires poking out from Eileen's gear. According to this, you're about one bad shot away from joining the scrap heap. Eileen raised an eyebrow. Tell that to those brainwashed zealots. I'll bet they're still trying to figure out which way is up. Let them, Mal said with a smirk. If there's one thing we do better than anyone, it's making life complicated. Cassio nodded, his expression hardening as he considered their next move. They'd survived the day, but tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The Empire wasn't known for its patience or forgiveness. They'd come back with more weapons, more soldiers, and more determination to crush the rebellion. But Cassio had a secret weapon of his own. A crew made up of the galaxy's finest misfits. Each one of them had proven time and again that they could take whatever the universe threw at them and turn it into a punchline. All right, team, Cassio said, pushing off from the wall. Let's get moving. We've got a galaxy to annoy. They gathered their gear, stowing away the last remnants of their impromptu victory party. The Dyson Sphere city might have been silent for now, but they knew better than to let their guard down. The Empire's reach was long, and its memory even longer. As they headed out of the storage bay, Cassio couldn't help but feel a sliver of satisfaction. They'd done what everyone said was impossible. They'd taken on the Empire and lived to tell the tale. Think they'll ever learn their lesson? Terran asked as they slipped through the shadows, footsteps quiet, hearts still racing. Not a chance, Cassio replied, his grin wicked and defiant. But we'll be here to teach them, lesson by painful lesson. And with that, they vanished into the maze of the Dyson Sphere city, rebels with a cause, fighters without a plan. But one thing was certain. The universe would never be the same again. Do you think they'll put us in the history books? Mal asked, his voice echoing down the dim corridor. They'll have to find us first, Ren shot back with a laugh. And by the time they do, we'll have rewritten a few chapters. Cassio led them through another series of twisting passages, each one a testament to human engineering's ability to make things more complicated than necessary. The Empire had built the Dyson Sphere city as a monument to their power, and now it served as a playground for the crew's brand of organized chaos. You know, I've always wanted my own chapter in a grand epic, Terran mused, their fingers dancing over a datapad as they kept a lookout for any signs of pursuit. Preferably one where I don't die horribly. Hey, who needs epics? Eileen chuckled. I'm all for a series of poorly written pamphlets distributed by eccentric historians centuries from now. Like those you find in hotel drawers? Ren suggested, grinning. The kind that leave more questions than answers? Exactly, Eileen nodded. The kind that make you wonder just how much of it was made up. Cassio snorted. Well, if they get anything right, I hope it's that we never learned to quit. The irony of it all wasn't lost on him. They were fugitives, rebels, locked in an endless cycle of defiance and survival. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was a kind of freedom in not having anything left to lose. Planetarium or bust, Mal declared as they slipped through a final bulkhead, the city sprawling out before them. I hear they've got the best view in the galaxy. They moved quickly, their path taking them deeper into the heart of the Dyson Sphere city. The Empire's soldiers might have been on their trail, but the crew had more than a few tricks up their sleeves. Cassio had learned long ago how to navigate the labyrinthine passages, each twist and turn another chance to lose their pursuers and gain the upper hand. Terran, how's the console looking? Cassio asked, nodding at the device that had become as much a part of their crew as any of them. Terran glanced down, the screen flickering ominously. It's holding up, for now. But I'd rather not bet my life on it. Good thing we've got a backup plan, Cassio said, his voice dry as sand. Ren shot him a look. We do? Of course, Cassio grinned, brandishing the ancient laser rifle. It's called, making it up as we go along. Well, at least it's worked so far, Eileen said, the edge of her lips curling upwards in a wry smile. They reached a series of service tunnels that led away from the main corridors, hidden pathways known only to those desperate or foolish enough to seek them out. Here, the air was cooler, the walls echoing with the distant hum of machinery. Feels like home, Mal commented, his laughter bouncing off the metal walls. Considering we've spent more time running from the law than sleeping in actual beds, it should, Cassio replied, his tone somewhere between sardonic and resigned. As they navigated the maze, Cassio felt that familiar mix of anxiety and adrenaline simmering beneath his skin. They had pulled off the impossible, but this was just another step in a journey that was far from over. Any idea where we're going to lay low? Ren asked, his gaze sharp as ever. Somewhere they wouldn't think to look, Cassio answered. Somewhere only a madman would consider hiding. Looks like we're in luck, Terran said, pointing towards a dimly lit alcove. I know just the place. The alcove was little more than a niche carved out of necessity, but it was enough. They'd made do with less before, and Cassio knew they'd make it work again. It was a patchwork hideout, a reflection of their own resilience and determination. Welcome to Casa de Insanity, Mal declared, tossing his bag into the corner. Cassio settled against the wall, the weight of their recent victory lingering in the air. They'd done what few dared to even dream of, and yet, there was no time to celebrate. The Empire would regroup, recalibrate, and come after them with a vengeance. We've got some time before they catch up, Cassio said, his gaze sweeping over his team. Let's make the most of it. The crew relaxed, knowing these quiet moments were few and far between. It was a chance to catch their breath, to regroup before the next round. They might be outlaws, but they were also something more. A family forged in the crucible of defiance. So, what's next on our grand tour of chaos? Ren asked, settling down beside Cassio. We keep moving, making the Empire's life as difficult as possible, Cassio replied. And maybe, just maybe, we find a way to turn their own weapons against them. Terran nodded, their expression thoughtful. It's a long shot. Cassio shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. Long shots are kind of our thing. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, each of them contemplating the path ahead. They had no map, no plan, just each other and a stubborn refusal to back down. And that, Cassio thought, might just be enough.